The paranormal is a rule of violence because it violates the natural order that Christ created. Okay, let me repeat that because you need to understand this. After Christ completed creating the heavens and the earth in 6 days, he said it's very good. So male and female, so human sexuality, is Christ's design. Okay? So anything that goes against the natural design that Christ made is violence because it violates the rule of life. Because what Christ designed is intended for life and abundance. So if it goes against the design of Christ, it violates life. So it brings forth death. It brings forth self-destruction. The paranormal is a rule of self-destruction, is a rule of violence. So it can only operate in violence, either by instilling fear into human beings and trap them in a violent structure, or by offering individuals relief from the outbreaks of violence. And many turn to the paranormal to escape violence. But what they don't understand is that the paranormal is the rule of violence. And here's the thing. When you go to the paranormal to escape violence, you don't really escape it. You're being relieved from it, but the violence is still there. The threat is still there. You just have relief. And then you need to work out to maintain that relief, and that working hard will destroy you. The paranormal is a rule of violence. And the only way the paranormal can function if it remains in denial. With denial, I mean a violent resistance against the truth. Why am I repeating this? It's because when you agree with Christ, you align yourself with His power, with the supernatural. Yes, you have your physical weaknesses in your physical body and your weaknesses in your mind. Those are natural. Those will not change because remember, those natural vulnerabilities and natural weaknesses are natural. They're very good. There's nothing wrong with them. But here's the thing. The world conditioned you to think there's something wrong with your natural vulnerabilities and your natural weaknesses. The world taught you to agree against yourself. And to agree against yourself means that you agree against Christ. And now that you've agreed against yourself, you've also agreed with that you need compensation for your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities. Even though those weaknesses and vulnerabilities are very good. Because they're parts of Christ's design for life and abundance. So now that you've agreed against yourself, because you don't do this on purpose, because nobody in their right mind would agree against Christ, but you've been conditioned to agree against Christ. So now that you've agreed against Christ, now you have this unconscious agreement inside of you, now you have all kinds of unexamined expectations. And now that the dysfunction emerges, you want a way out. But the paranormal, through the pagan rules of this world, will never show you the truth. They will show you true facts to keep you trapped. And that is what religion does. That's what fortune telling does. That's why I told you to stay away from fortune telling. Look, when you agree with Christ and the garbage expectations of the world are out of you, you will now face the violence that is in the world. Before, you used to compensate for your weaknesses by either learning martial arts or to learn how to so-called defend yourself physically, or you've learned to appease other people, or you learn to give into politics, or I don't care what type of coping mechanism you've learned. Before you agree with Christ, you used to look for compensation. That's all you had. You had no other option than to look for compensation. So you can't blame yourself for that. Some compensations were far worse than others, but that's the only thing you had. Now that you're in line with Christ, you're now in line with life and abundance Himself. I don't say itself, say Himself. Because it's not some impersonal structure that you call the universe, like some pagans think. No, it's a relationship. You are in line with life and abundance Himself, who is Christ. And now you will clearly see the violence around you that you didn't notice before. Because before it remained unconscious to you, unless it manifested in extreme forms. Often it's only the extreme expressions of violence that we recognize as violence. But the root structures we don't recognize as violence. And let me tell you, in social life, and especially in human sexual relationships, there is a lot of violence going on. I'm not going to talk about it now because I would be here for hours discussing that subject, but there's a lot of violence going on over there. Here's why. Plain and simple. Male sexual energy is a reflection of Christ's power. Because the male, the man, is made in Christ's image. He's a reflective being that reflects the glory of God. So the male energy field is quite powerful, far more powerful than the female energy field. And part of the male energy field is also his sexual emissions. I'm not just talking about sexual physical activity, because sexuality begins in the mind. It's a spirit thing. You are a spirit being. And male sexual emission is very powerful. Demons are horny after it. They crave it. They crave that affectionate energy. And here's the thing. It's male power that keeps the world going. But not in the way you expect, because I mentioned before that the only way the paranormal can remain functioning is when they steal male's energy. That's why Christ called Adam dust after he fell. And he said to the serpent, on your belly you will go, and dust you will eat as long as you live. So Satan consequently will humiliate himself by chasing after the human being to steal the energy of the human being to keep himself. And that's what unclean spirits do. That's what the paranormal is. They need to steal male energy for them to have their rule of darkness. Because without the theft of male energy, there is no rule of darkness. There are no wars, there's no terrorism, there is most likely no crime. There are no broken families. There are almost no mental illnesses left. So when the theft of male energy by unclean spirits, when that stops, there's nothing anymore. So sexual confusion or sexual dysphoria, whatever you want to call it, that is the throne of Antichrist. Without this, you have no paranormal rule, so you have no rule of darkness. You get what I'm saying here? Yes, the enemy counterfeits the Heavenly Father. He does. So that's why you have Apollo now, who's the son of perdition, who is another demonic entity, through whom everything needs to happen. Because the Heavenly Father has Christ as his heir. So that's how Satan now has himself, the beast, and the false prophet to form a so-called 3-in-1 kind of thing. He can't completely copy the Heavenly Father, but he counterfeits the Heavenly Father, if you get what I'm saying here. Anyway, they depend on the theft of male energy, especially male sexual energy. And the only way this can happen is through violence. That's why in human social relationships, especially sexual relationships, whether it's marriages or just boyfriend and girlfriend relationships or whatever, that's why there's a lot of violence in those relationships. Not in absolutely all of them, but in many of them. And in the world, this is taboo not to speak about sexual violence. And here's the thing. The pagan rulers of this world told you and conditioned you not to discuss sexual confusion. You know why? Because that's the throne of their rule. Once you discuss that, you come to the root of the paranormal. And once this is dealt with, their whole rule of darkness collapses. Because the rule of darkness can only operate by going against Christ's natural design. And the way they can keep their paranormal rule is when they condition the masses to agree against Christ. They have to trick you into doing this, because anyone, I'm not saying everyone, but anyone that just thinks clearly would never agree against Christ. But they trick you into agreeing against Christ. And once they've succeeded in tricking you to agree against Christ, you are vulnerable to all types of deception. You get what I'm saying here? So when you agree with Christ, you'll begin to see the violence around you clearly. And it may be shocking in the beginning, it may be overwhelming, but that's how it has always been in the world, but you were just not aware of it. And now you understand what you've been delivered from. Look, walking by faith is not easy, not because there's something wrong with walking by faith, but because you live in a world that agrees against Christ when people just refuse to give up violence. That's it. But as a believer, you learn to overrule violence, to trample upon violence, and to exhaust violence, that violence will collapse itself. That's what you do when you walk by faith, because you follow Christ. What Christ really did by allowing them to kill him at the cross, he caused the paranormal to commit suicide. Because what they did to Christ at Calvary was suicide unto them. Evil will destroy itself anyway, but Christ led evil to commit suicide on itself. And that suicide is not working out throughout human history. And unfortunately, many are aligning themselves with the self-destruction of the paranormal. But that's their loss. Do you agree with Christ? The only option for you is to agree with him to overrule the self-destruction of the world. So agree with Christ. Don't agree with the world. And with the world, I mean don't agree with the pagan rule that's around you. Well, and about sexual violence, I made several videos about it in the past. I didn't go very deep into the subject, but in this Remind video, I'm telling you as it is. Sexual, I'm say, what's it? Let me describe it clear. Sexual confusion that starts in the mind, so it's mental sexual confusion that is the throne of Antichrist. Without it, you have no paranormal rule, you have no rule of darkness, and you have no shadow government, no terrorism, no wars. 99% of the crime would not exist. And without that, you would have nurturing relationships, you would have harmony between between the nations of mankind. You would really have brotherly love between nations, between ethnicities. You would have more expression of art, you would have real jobs that pay well, and you wouldn't have these toxic capitalistic structures that exploit human lives. Unfortunately, many of the human population keep agreeing with Satan against themselves. But they'll pay for this when Christ returns, because there is no way you can agree against life and abundance himself and not receive the self-inflicted repercussions. And some will face and endure those self-inflicted repercussions for all eternity. But that's them. To you that agree with Christ, agree with him. Be at peace.